are going to dive into milestones and milestone ministries today. And I did milestones when I was working in the local church, and I also reached out to several colleagues and friends about milestones and why they use milestones and what they do and all those pieces. So this is kind of a conglomeration of both personal experience and experience with some of my colleagues. And I will share my notes with you all. But we're going to talk about why milestones. Why should we use milestones? We'll talk about how to use milestones. We'll talk about different components of them, and then some getting started and ideas. So that's where we're going to go. And I wanted to say there's a couple of resources that I'm going to talk about, but the one that I know that you all have is the Children and Family Ministry Handbook by Sarah Flannery. She has a whole chapter dedicated to milestones, and I pulled a lot of this out from this chapter. So you can refer back to that, and then I'll show you a couple other books at the end. But why milestones? A definition of what are milestones. Milestones are pulling out significant spiritual or emotional benchmarks or important moments in the life of children and then on into youth and adulthood, and celebrating that in the life of the congregation. And that can be done in a number of different ways. So why do milestones? Because it enriches family ministry. It can be identity forming, and it marks those important emotional and spiritual milestones, and it's support for spiritual development. It's like having a birthday party around a spiritual development. It's also empowering. So it empowers caregivers or parents at home, as well as people within the church. And it's especially empowering, as we're talking about children's ministry, to have a parent component to go along with whatever the milestone is, so that there's a sense of learning together and then taking it home and practicing together. And it can also be a carrot. I use them as a kind of a carrot to invite families to come in for something specific, because I find that families are more likely to come for something specific, even if I don't see them regularly. So it's something to invite them in and then send them home with something that they can use at home for faith formation. It's intergenerational, inviting different generations in, even if that is children and parents. That's intergenerational. It could be other generations that come in and wrap themselves around. When it's done during worship, then you include the entire worshiping community together in that milestone. It's inclusive and it can be flexible. Inclusive meaning that it can incorporate all ages, all abilities, all you pick it, everything. It can include all of those things. It's also builds resilience. Those rituals, covenants, commitments, milestones can counter trauma-related isolation and brokenness by surrounding a child or a family with a community of people that promises to stand by them in God's name. And that's something I think as we're learning how to recover from COVID, and I don't necessarily mean if you've had it, but just the whole pandemic experience, we might be able to use milestones as a way to build resilience and to counter some of the trauma that has happened from this COVID pandemic experience. And the resilience building as we remind children and families that they are bearers of God's name. And those are important things. So how can we do this? There's many ways, but I'm going to point out kind of two easy to remember ways. One is physical stages. So it's an age or life stage. It's easier to plan, and it may not be fully encompassing of all people and situations. Think about like a new baby, giving a gift to a new baby. That's an age right? That's the only time that you would do that. Or entering kindergarten. That's an age or a life stage. It'll be entering kindergarten would be that one time. Or the third grade Bible, we're giving it for third graders. So that could be one way of planning milestones is physical stages. And then as you get into youth, because I know some of you work with youth in all ages, it would be, when we finish confirmation or when we graduate from high school or into adulthood, those stages, retirement, empty nester, grandparent, those kinds of pieces. Or it could be achievements. And I think this is kind of fun, comparing it to a scouting merit badge. I have 2 boys that just started scouting this year, and one of them is a Boy Scout. And so we're all about getting the merit badges and earning the things that we need to so that he can get a merit badge. So it's similar to that, not exactly the same, but think about it as earning a merit badge, or it could be more all encompassing, and it's less about age or life stage and more about a moment or a season. So it's different from starting kindergarten or saying we're starting in a new school. So that incorporates families that have moved and are starting in a new school, kindergarten, high school, college, all of those pieces. You can make it wider and call it a back to school blessing, and then it's everybody. Or completed a service project. So that could be 4th and 5th graders that have done a service project, or it could be middle schoolers, or it could be adults. So it's more all encompassing. Sarah gave some really great examples in her book about middle schoolers. Instead of having a physical stage for finishing middle school and starting in high school, it could be or starting middle school, could be starting a new school or new small group, like I said, completing a service project. So it's just wider, a wider kind of thing. Or it could be a combination of both. And that's probably the one that's the most practical. The nice thing about the achievements piece is that it's more flexible. So if you're doing a new Bible, it might be that most of the students are in 3rd grade and they're receiving a new Bible, but it could be that there's a 2nd grader who's in an advanced reading level and is ready for that Bible. Or it could be that you have a young adult who has some learning disabilities and is now ready for that Bible. So it's more all-encompassing. Choosing milestones. And this is where you get to be creative. I'm finding that I'm spending a lot of energy on not creative things. So it may be exciting to get to think about some creative pieces. So you think about your church DNA. What's the size? What are the demographics, attendance? What's the mission or goals of your church? Thinking about that. Thinking about the priorities. Who does the church prioritize? If your church is prioritizing older adults, then maybe you start there. If your church prioritizes children, then maybe you start there, or youth, wherever your church is prioritizing. This makes it manageable in a time when we may be feeling overwhelmed. So we don't have to do everything. We can start with one area. Thinking about inside and outside. How can we design milestones to attract people from outside too? Are there ways that we can, if you have a preschool or a child care center in your church, are there ways that you can incorporate milestones with those families? How else might you design milestones to attract people from outside too? And then what do you got? We map out what you already offer. And you may find that you already are doing some of these things. You just haven't called them milestones or put all the components together or thought about them in an intentional way of how can we invite families in through these opportunities. Okay, so components. There's kind of 2 components. One is that milestones pull families more deeply into the life of the church. And the second is that it equips people to follow God more closely outside the church walls. So it's both this in we're pulling people more deeply into the life of the church by inviting them to be a part of something in our church. And then we're giving them what they need to be able to follow God more closely the rest of the week, 24/7 faith. So it's that both in and out. And then the components of what you would include in a milestone is it's corporate. So each milestone happens in community, preferably corporate worship. This could be a both and, where it could be children learn about baptism or learn about communion together. So that's the milestone. And then they helped to assist with baptism or serve communion and are recognized that they've spent time getting to understand the sacrament in that corporate worship setting. So there's that both learning and being in community. Every milestone has a tangible symbol. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be a photo of the group. It could be a cross. It could be a shell. It could be something tangible. I got clay that I made into like an oval, and then I would draw the symbol of whatever we were. So for third grade Bibles, there was a picture of a Bible. For confirmation, I think I did like a cross and flame or something like that. But every milestone would have a tangible symbol. Baptism could be a shell, those kinds of pieces. And congregational support invites all the congregation into the milestone. So for example, if it was, an easy one is baptism. If you have a child, an infant who's being baptized, in the United Methodist Church, there's already liturgy that invites the congregation into the life of that child and in that family, and helping them to learn and grow and be part of that faith community. So it's kind of that idea of how are we inviting the congregation into the milestone. And caregivers. As you're doing a milestone, how can you invite caregivers to share in their own group and empower them to be stronger disciples themselves, which then makes their family stronger? So for baptism, if you're having several children who are being baptized in the same time or the same season, you can invite those caregivers, parents, to be in a group together, learn about what is baptism, what does it mean to be part of this faith community, and here's some things to take home so that you can practice at home. And so those are the ways that you can support not only the whole congregation, the individual, but also have something tangible as a memento to remember that season, remember that time, and caring for the caregivers, inviting them to be part of learning and growing and continuing as well. All right, this is milestoneministry.com. If you are like, this is great, but I don't have time to put stuff together, this may be a place that you can look at some resources around what can I do. They don't pay me to say anything. I'm just sharing a resource. They break it down into 5 stages. Naming, so they name the meaningful or memorable event. The second is equipping, and they do that through caring conversations, devotion, service, ritual, and tradition. So there's some ways that they practice that milestone. They offer a blessing, some kind of a gift as a visual reminder, and then reinforcing a follow-up gathering to grow deeper. So it's not just a one-time thing. For example, if we're talking about baptism, we have the actual baptism, but maybe after 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, they have a gathering again, or maybe at the 1-year anniversary, they have a gathering as a follow-up to grow deeper and to celebrate that moment. So you can learn more about milestone ministry, and I'll share some of the opportunities that they have too. But that would be another option if you're trying to get started. Okay, milestone ideas. There's a lot. And I put this slide here because there's a lot, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. I just want you to see that there's lots of ideas and there's lots of ways you can go, but you can keep it as simple as you need to. New baby or adoption, baptism. And because in the United Methodist Church, we believe in infant baptism, this baptism is one of those milestones that can happen at any time in a life. It can happen as an infant, child, youth, adult. anytime we have a baptism, that is a milestone. A milestone around prayer or worship for a new school year, especially perhaps for children who are starting kindergarten, when they receive a Bible, memorizing scripture, service, faith and sexuality. No, faith. Oh yeah, I have that twice. Faith and sexuality. I guess I thought it was really important. Confirmation, high school graduation. And then as we can think about adulthood, a first home, celebrating marriage, empty nest, grandparenting, driver's license. That's another one. When a young person gets a driver's license, that's a really big milestone. And it's not necessarily a spiritual milestone per se, but we can use it to be something that we gather the church community around a young person, and acknowledge that this is a big piece of their growing up and that the church is supporting them. So there's a few. I wanted to share a practical, like, how does this work in a local church? So Dee Dee Riley is a children's director at McEachern United Methodist Church in North Georgia. And she has faith milestones that are pretty, they're very well organized. And they include all of the pieces that we've talked about today. And she has a list of, I didn't put it on here. She has a list of things that they do. So, I lost it. So give me a second. Okay. So they do a class on Holy Communion so that the children and the families come and they learn about communion together. They do one on prayer stations. They do one for, it's called I Love My Church. And they go on a scavenger hunt around the church to learn about the different parts of the church and what things are called. And those tricky vocabulary words like pew and narthex and altar and all of those things, pulpit, lectern, what do all those things mean? Getting to see what the church means. And I've done that, and the parents loved it just as much as the kids because they don't know what all those things mean necessarily. There's a service one, I can serve, and they do some acolyte training around that also. Baptism, a leadership training. They do a retreat, a middle school transition, Wonderfully Made, which is human sexuality, worship with family, go on a mission trip. So those are some different things, and they have them broken down both by age group and by kind of more flexible. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. And I share her website. This is her piece specifically about faith milestones if you want to see more about how Dee Dee and McEachern work faith milestones. Okay, so what is next? Take a breath. If you are already doing some of these things, and I'm sure that you are, name that. What do you already do? And make sure that you know your why. If we're going to be intentional about milestones, why are we going to do that? And how does that fit in with the big why of our church? What do we need to add or modify or take out? And how do we make this lifelong? And I added that for those who are over more than children or work with folks that are over different age groups. And how can we make this something that expands for the whole life together. Some resources. I already shared Sarah's book, so I highly recommend that book. There's the whole chapter that's devoted to it. Tracy Smith, Faithful Families. Some of you have seen this book before. It's not milestones per se, but you can totally adapt it into milestones. And how do we do that? Faith, or even just language about how do I talk, like what's the script that I can use? Faith formation with a new generation. Also has a section in here about milestones and thinking through what that can look like. I'm trying to remember if it's actually called milestones. I think they call them faith forming experiences in chapter 3, but that's another resource. There are other resources if you go and search online. This is a book called Shift. It is from Group. I would, if you just decide to read it, I would be wary of some of the theology in it, but it does have some good ideas in there. I think that was the other big one. Another idea that you can use if you have the book, The Hopeful Family. Again, it's not milestones per se, but there might be some things that you can use in here for how do we connect this from the church experience to the home experience, and milestoneministry.org, as I've mentioned before.